I sat across from my son at Patricia Reynolds' law office, watching his face cycle through confusion, then rage, as she read the words that would change everything. To my son Kyle, I leave the sum of $50,000, with the hope that he'll remember what truly matters. Kyle's hand slammed against the mahogany desk so hard the coffee cups rattled. 50,000? That's it? What about the house? The cabin? The rest of the money? But Pat wasn't finished reading, and what came next made my son's face drain of all color. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been standing in my kitchen on Maple Ridge Road, rolling out pie dough the way Maggie had taught me 40 years ago. The November rain drummed steadily against the windows, and the house smelled like cinnamon and butter, those warm scents that used to fill our home every Thanksgiving. My hands worked the dough automatically, muscle memory taking over while my mind wandered to other November mornings, when Maggie would be beside me, flour dusting her cheeks, laughing at my attempts to crimp the edges properly. The phone rang, and I wiped my hands on the dish towel before answering. "Hey, Dad." Kyle's voice had that particular tone, the one he used when he was about to deliver news he knew I wouldn't like. "Got a minute?" "Sure, son. I'm just working on the pies. Your mom's pumpkin recipe. Thought I'd make an extra one this year since Emma loved it so much last Thanksgiving." The silence on the other end stretched just a beat too long. "Yeah, about that. About Thanksgiving. Vanessa and I need to talk to you about our plans." I set down the rolling pin, something cold settling in my chest. "What kind of plans?" "Well, the Bradfords are hosting this year. It's going to be this whole thing at their place in Riverside Heights. Caroline's been planning it for months. They've hired a chef, they're doing a formal dinner, and honestly, Dad, it's going to be really nice." The rain against the window suddenly seemed louder. "I see. Richard's invited some important people. Business contacts. It's a great networking opportunity for me, and Vanessa really wants to show Emma how a proper holiday dinner works. You understand. A proper holiday dinner. As if the 40 years of Thanksgivings Maggie and I had hosted were somehow improper. As if the laughter and love that had filled this house every November were inadequate because we didn't have a chef or important people. What about our tradition, Kyle? We've had Thanksgiving here since before you were born. Dad, come on. Things change. You can't expect everything to stay the same forever." I looked around my kitchen, at the pie dough waiting to be shaped, at Maggie's recipe box sitting on the counter with her handwriting visible on the index cards. At the empty chair in the dining room where she used to sit, the one I'd left vacant for 3 years because I couldn't bear to see anyone else in her spot. Your mother and I started this tradition the year we got married. We've hosted every single Thanksgiving. Even that year when she was so sick from the chemo, she still insisted on making her green bean casserole. I know, Dad, and those were great. But I'm not a kid anymore. I have my own family now, and we need to make our own choices. His own family. The words landed like a punch. Apparently, his own family didn't include his father. Does Emma know? She was so excited last week when I showed her how to make the cranberry sauce. Another pause. She'll understand. Kids are adaptable. And honestly, Dad, the Bradford place is amazing. She'll have a great time. I closed my eyes, seeing last Thanksgiving clearly. Emma standing on a stool beside me, carefully measuring ingredients, her tongue poking out in concentration. The way she beamed when Maggie's stuffing came out perfect. How she'd fallen asleep on the couch afterward, her small hand still clutching a dinner roll. "So you're saying you're not coming? You're choosing the Bradfords over your own father?" "It's not about choosing anyone over anyone. It's just dinner, Dad. We'll see you for Christmas. Just dinner. 40 years of tradition, of memories, of love baked into every dish, reduced to just dinner. Kyle, your mother would be heartbroken. Don't." His voice went sharp. "Don't use Mom to guilt trip me. She's gone, Dad. It's been 3 years. Life moves on. The words hit harder than I expected. She's gone. As if I didn't wake up every morning reaching for her side of the bed. As if I didn't still set out 2 coffee cups before remembering. As if her absence wasn't a constant ache in my chest that never quite faded. You're right, I said quietly. She is gone. But she built something here, Kyle. She built a family, a home, traditions that meant something. And you're just walking away from all of it for what? So you can impress your father-in-law's business friends? That's not fair. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The Bradfords have expectations. Vanessa has a position to maintain in her social circle. This matters for my career. And I don't matter? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Dad, you're being dramatic. It's one Thanksgiving. You'll be fine. After he hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the half-made pie. The house felt enormous suddenly, every room echoing with ghosts of Thanksgivings past. I could almost hear Maggie's voice, the way she'd hum while cooking, the sound of Kyle's childhood laughter, the chaos of family filling every corner with warmth. Now there was just silence and rain and the realization that my son had chosen status over his father. Chosen a catered meal with strangers over the place where his mother's love still lived in every tradition. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, looking at the photographs lining the hallway. Kyle as a baby, held by both Maggie and me in front of the Christmas tree. Kyle at 5, covered in pumpkin pie filling, grinning with missing front teeth. Kyle at 16, rolling his eyes but smiling as Maggie made him pose for the annual Thanksgiving photo. Kyle at 25, bringing Vanessa home for the first time, how nervous he'd been, how proud. When had he stopped being that boy? When had family become something to be scheduled around business opportunities? I found myself in the garage, running my hand along the hood of my old Ford pickup. Maggie and I had restored this truck together, spending weekends in this very garage, her handing me tools, both of us covered in grease and laughing at our mistakes. She'd loved this truck. Loved what it represented. Hard work, patience, building something together. I made a decision then, standing in that dark garage at 2 a.m. If Kyle wanted to build his own family, his own traditions with the Bradfords, then he could live with those choices. But he wouldn't get to walk away from everything Maggie and I had built and still expect to inherit it all. The next morning, I called Patricia Reynolds and made an appointment to update my will. The week before Thanksgiving crawled by with agonizing slowness. Kyle didn't call again, and I didn't reach out. Instead, I kept myself busy. I volunteered extra hours at the Cedar Falls Community Hall, helping set up for their annual community Thanksgiving dinner for folks who didn't have family nearby or couldn't afford a big meal. Tom Garcia, my neighbor and friend of 30 years, found me there on Tuesday afternoon, arranging tables. Heard Kyle's not coming for Thanksgiving, Tom said, grabbing the other end of a folding table. News traveled fast in Cedar Falls. He made other plans. The Bradford place, I heard. Fancy spread. So I'm told. Tom studied my face as we sat down the table. You doing okay, Walt? Was I okay? I'd lost my wife 3 years ago, and now my son was choosing wealthy strangers over his own father. I was spending my days preparing a community dinner for people I barely knew while my own family celebrated elsewhere. I'm managing, I said, because what else could I say? Maggie wouldn't have stood for this, Tom said quietly. She'd have driven over there and dragged Kyle back by his ear, 38 years old or not. I smiled despite myself, because it was true. Maggie had been fierce about family, about loyalty, about showing up for the people who mattered. She would have been devastated by Kyle's choice, but she also would have fought for what was right. Maybe that's what she would want me to do now. Not fight to change Kyle's mind, that ship had sailed, but fight to preserve what we'd built. To make sure our values meant something, even if our son had forgotten them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of November day that makes you want to stay inside where it's warm. I woke up early, like I always did, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. For 40 years, this morning had meant something. Maggie rushing around the kitchen, me getting the turkey in the oven, both of us working in that synchronized dance that comes from decades of partnership. The house would already smell like sage and onions by now, and she'd be wearing that ridiculous apron with the pilgrim turkeys on it that Kyle had made her in 3rd grade. I got up and made coffee, the mechanical routine of it comforting in its familiarity. Through the kitchen window, I could see the Garcias house already alive with activity. Their daughter had driven in from Seattle with her kids, and I could hear the excited voices of children even through the walls. Normal families doing normal things. Having normal Thanksgivings with the people who mattered. My phone sat silent on the counter. Part of me had hoped Kyle would call, would change his mind, would remember what today meant. But as 8 o'clock became 9, then 10, I accepted that no call was coming. He was probably already at the Bradford estate, drinking champagne and making small talk with Richard's business associates, pretending he came from the kind of family that had catered Thanksgivings in formal dining rooms. I showered and dressed carefully, putting on the nice sweater Maggie had given me our last Christmas together. Navy blue, soft wool, she'd said it brought out my eyes. Then I gathered the pies I'd made, the ones Kyle would never eat, and loaded them into my truck. If my family didn't want them, I knew people who would. The Cedar Falls Community Hall buzzed with activity when I arrived. Volunteers rushed around setting up steam tables, arranging flowers, checking the sound system. Maria Chen, who coordinated the event, spotted me immediately. "Walt, thank goodness. Can you help Roger with the chairs in the back room? We're expecting at least 200 people this year. 200 people who would spend today with strangers rather than sit alone. 200 stories of family dysfunction, loss, poverty, or simple geographic distance." I wasn't alone in my abandonment, just alone in my house. Tom found me again around noon, as I was helping carry trays of rolls to the serving line. "You sure you don't want to come to our place? Maria's got enough food to feed an army, and you know you're always welcome." "I appreciate it, Tom. But I think I need to be here today." He nodded, understanding without me having to explain. Sometimes showing up for strangers was easier than facing the pity of friends who knew your whole story. The dinner started at 2 o'clock. Families came and bundled against the cold, some dressed in their Sunday best, others in whatever they had. Older folks who'd outlived their families. Young couples far from home. Single parents stretching budgets too thin to afford both rent and a holiday meal. Children who didn't understand why Thanksgiving at the community hall was supposed to be different from Thanksgiving anywhere else. I worked the serving line, spooning mashed potatoes onto plates, smiling at everyone who passed by. An elderly woman with kind eyes thanked me 3 times. A little boy, maybe 6, told me these were the best potatoes he'd ever tasted. A veteran with trembling hands and haunted eyes just nodded, but I saw the gratitude there anyway. Around 4 o'clock, as things were winding down, my phone finally buzzed. A text from Kyle. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad. Hope you're having a good day." No apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just a generic holiday greeting, the kind of thing you'd send to a distant cousin or an old coworker. I stared at it for a long moment, then put the phone back in my pocket without responding. "Everything okay?" Maria asked, appearing beside me with 2 cups of coffee. "Family trouble," I said, accepting the coffee. "Isn't it always?" She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 4 years. Some argument about her husband that I can barely remember now. But pride's a powerful thing. It keeps people apart even when love should bring them together." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the volunteers clean up, watching the last guests gather their to-go containers and head back out into the cold. "You made a difference today, Walt," Maria said. "All these people, they'll remember that someone cared enough to show up. That matters more than you know." Maybe it did. Maybe showing up was all we could do sometimes. Show up, do the work, try to live according to the values we claim to hold. Even when our own children forgot those values, forgot us. I drove home as darkness fell, the streets of Cedar Falls quiet in that particular way they get on holidays, everyone tucked inside their lit windows with their families. My house sat dark at the end of Maple Ridge Road, and I had to steel myself before going in. The silence hit me like a physical weight. I turned on lights, turned on the television for background noise, but nothing could fill the emptiness where family used to be. I heated up a plate of food I'd brought back from the community hall and sat at my dining room table, Maggie's empty chair across from me. The table that should have been full of people and laughter and the controlled chaos of a real Thanksgiving sat empty except for me. That's when I let myself feel it. The grief, not just for Maggie, though God knows I missed her every day, but for the family we'd built together that had apparently died with her. For the son who'd chosen appearances over authenticity. For the traditions that meant nothing to anyone but me now. For the little boy who'd been so excited about Thanksgiving, who'd helped me rake leaves so we could jump in the piles together, who'd sat in this very kitchen doing homework while Maggie cooked and I told bad jokes. Where had that boy gone? When had he been replaced by this stranger who measured relationships in terms of networking opportunities and social positioning? I thought about Emma, wondered what she was doing right now at the Bradford estate. Was she having fun? Was anyone teaching her about family, about loyalty, about showing up for the people who loved you? Or was she learning that love was conditional, that family was optional, that old people in modest houses weren't worth your time when you could be somewhere impressive? The next morning, I woke up with clarity I hadn't felt in years. I called Patricia Reynolds and confirmed our appointment for the following week. "You're sure about this, Walt?" she'd asked when I first outlined what I wanted to do. "Your son is going to be very surprised." "Good," I'd said. "He deserves to be surprised. He deserves to understand that choices have consequences." But that morning after Thanksgiving, sitting in my too quiet house, I realized it wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge or teaching Kyle a lesson. It was about honoring what Maggie and I had built, what we'd believed in, what we'd tried to pass down to our son. If he didn't value those things, then someone else should benefit from them. Someone who understood that family wasn't about wealth or status or impressing the right people. Someone who understood that showing up mattered. The week passed slowly. Kyle sent another text on Sunday, asking if I'd had a good Thanksgiving, still not acknowledging that he'd abandoned me for it. I responded with a simple "fine, thanks," and left it at that. What else was there to say? He'd made his choice, and I was making mine. On Wednesday, I drove to Patricia's office downtown. The building was one of the old ones, built back when Cedar Falls was thriving, with high ceilings and crown molding and windows that looked out over Main Street. Her office was on the second floor, full of law books and comfortable chairs and the smell of strong coffee that was always brewing. "Walt," she greeted me, gesturing to a seat across from her desk. "I've drawn up the documents we discussed. But before we go any further, I need to make sure this is really what you want. Estate planning is serious business, and family dynamics are complicated." "I've never been more certain of anything," I told her. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded and opened the folder on her desk. "All right then. Let's go through this carefully. Your current will leaves everything to Kyle, as your sole heir, correct?" "That's right. The house, the cabin at Lake Wenatchee, my retirement accounts, Maggie's life insurance money that I've been saving, everything. And you want to change that?" "Substantially." Patricia pulled out the new documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Under the new will, your son Kyle will receive $50,000, outright, with no conditions or strings attached. The family home on Maple Ridge Road will be donated to the Cedar Falls Fire Department to be used as a training facility. Your cabin at Lake Wenatchee will be transferred to the Cedar Falls Youth Program for use as a summer camp for underprivileged children. The remainder of your estate, approximately $1.3 million, will be divided as follows: 40% to the Cedar Falls Community Fund, 30% to a trust fund for your granddaughter Emma, accessible only when she turns 25, and 30% to be distributed among various local charities." I listened to her read it back, hearing Maggie's voice in every decision. She would have approved of this. She would have understood. Patricia looked up from the documents, her expression serious but not judgmental. Walt, I have to ask. Have you considered the possibility of reconciliation with Kyle? Sometimes family rifts heal with time, and you might regret this decision later. I leaned back in the chair, my hands resting on the worn armrests. Pat, my son looked me in the eye and told me that one Thanksgiving didn't matter. That I was being dramatic for caring about 40 years of family tradition. He chose a networking opportunity over his father. That tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. People make mistakes. They get caught up in their lives, their marriages, their ambitions. It doesn't always mean they don't love you. Maybe not. But love without action is just a word. Maggie used to say that. You can tell someone you love them all day long, but if you don't show up when it matters, those words don't mean anything. I met her eyes directly. Kyle didn't show up. And I think Maggie would want me to make sure our life's work goes to people who understand what showing up means. Patricia nodded slowly, making a note on her legal pad. All right. There's one more provision we discussed. The letter. Do you want to include that? Yes. Kyle needs to understand why this happened. Not so he'll feel guilty, though maybe that too, but so he'll have the chance to be different. To teach Emma something better than what he's teaching her now. I'll attach it to the will, to be read after the primary distributions are announced. Is there anything you want to add or change to what you've already written? I thought about the letter I drafted, sitting at Maggie's old desk in our bedroom, trying to find words that would bridge the gap between my hurt and what I hoped Kyle might learn from this. No. It says what it needs to say. We spent another hour going over details, signing documents, having everything witnessed and notarized. Patricia's assistant, a young woman named Jennifer, came in to serve as a witness, along with Tom Garcia, who I'd asked to meet me there. Tom signed where he needed to, his hand on my shoulder afterward. You're a good man, Walt Thompson, he said quietly. Maggie would be proud of what you're doing. That night, I slept better than I had since Kyle's phone call. The decision was made, the papers were signed, and I'd done what I could to honor the values Maggie and I had spent a lifetime building together. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. December arrived with the first real snow, blanketing Cedar Falls in white that made everything look clean and new. Kyle called on the 5th, his voice cheerful in that forced way that meant he was trying to pretend everything was normal. Hey Dad, wanted to talk about Christmas plans. Vanessa's parents are doing this ski trip to Aspen, but we thought maybe we could stop by your place on Christmas Eve, let Emma open a present or two with you. Stop by. Like I was a convenience store on their way to somewhere better. What time were you thinking? Well, we need to be on the road by 6 to make our flight, so maybe we could come around 3? Give Emma an hour or so with you, then head out? An hour. 55 minutes longer than I'd gotten for Thanksgiving. I suppose I should be grateful. That's Christmas Eve, Kyle. Don't you want to spend the evening together as a family? We are spending it as a family. Vanessa's family. Come on, Dad, this is a huge opportunity. The Bradfords rented this amazing lodge, and Richard's invited some people from his firm. It's going to be incredible. There it was again. The Bradfords, the opportunities, the impressive plans that somehow always trumped his actual father. You know what, Kyle? Don't worry about stopping by. You should just head straight to the airport, make sure you don't miss your flight. Are you sure? I mean, Emma will be disappointed. Will she? Or will she be too excited about Aspen to notice? The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I almost apologized, almost took it back. Then Kyle's voice came back, cooler now. Fine. If that's how you want it. We'll send you pictures. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, wondering if this was how families ended. Not with some dramatic blow-up, but with a series of small abandonments, each one justified by something more important, until one day you looked up and realized you were completely alone. Christmas came and went quietly. Tom and Maria invited me over, and I went, grateful for their kindness but feeling like a charity case. Emma sent me a video message, clearly coached by Vanessa, wishing me Merry Christmas from a ski lodge that looked like something from a magazine. She was wearing designer ski clothes and holding hot chocolate in a mug that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. She looked happy, and I was glad for that, even as my heart broke a little more. The new year arrived with freezing rain and the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. I kept busy with volunteer work, with maintaining the house, with the ordinary routines of a quiet life. Kyle sent occasional texts, surface-level stuff about work and Emma's school activities, never acknowledging the growing distance between us. I responded politely, briefly, and tried not to think about how we'd become strangers who shared DNA and nothing else. In late January, I caught a cold that settled into my chest and wouldn't leave. Tom finally bullied me into seeing Dr. Anderson, who prescribed antibiotics and told me to take it easy. "You're not getting any younger, Walt," she said, not unkindly. "Your body needs rest to fight these things off." "I'm 72, not 90, I protested, but she just gave me that look doctors give patients who aren't taking their health seriously enough. 72 is old enough to be smart about taking care of yourself. Go home, rest, and if you're not better in a week, come back and see me." The cold lasted 3 weeks, stubborn and exhausting. I spent my days on the couch, watching old movies and sleeping more than I had in years. Tom checked on me daily, bringing soup and newspapers and complaints about his own adult children who lived too far away and called too infrequently. It was comforting, in a way, knowing I wasn't alone in the experience of being forgotten by the people you'd raised. Kyle never called during those 3 weeks. Never texted to ask how I was doing. I hadn't told him I was sick, but Maggie would have known somehow. She always knew when something was wrong, even when I tried to hide it. She'd show up with medicine and stern instructions and love that felt like being wrapped in a warm blanket. By mid-February, I was back on my feet but moving slower, feeling the weight of my years in a way I hadn't before. Dr. Anderson was pleased with my recovery but suggested I update my medical directives, make sure everything was in order. "Just a precaution," she said, but we both knew what she meant. I was getting older, and the cold had been a reminder that none of us last forever. I called Patricia Reynolds and made another appointment. When I arrived at her office, she took one look at me and frowned. "Walt, you look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "Just getting over a cold." Took more out of me than expected. I settled into the chair across from her desk, accepting the coffee she offered. "I want to make sure my medical directives align with the will. Power of attorney, end-of-life decisions, all of it. Who do you want to designate as your healthcare proxy?" Typically, people choose their closest family member. I thought about Kyle, imagined him making decisions about my care between business meetings and social obligations with the Bradfords. Tom Garcia. He's been more family to me this past year than my actual son. Patricia made notes, not commenting on my choice, though I could see questions in her eyes. We spent an hour going through scenarios I didn't want to think about. What if I couldn't make my own medical decisions? What if I needed long-term care? What if I was dying and someone had to choose whether to keep fighting or let me go? "Tom will know what to do," I said finally. He knew Maggie, knew us together. He'll understand what I'd want. As I was leaving, Patricia walked me to the door, her hand gentle on my arm. "Walt, I hope you know that what you're doing with your estate, it's not vindictive. It's principled. There's a difference. I'm not sure Kyle will see it that way. Maybe not at first. But someday, when he's older and has had time to reflect, he might understand that you were trying to teach him something important. That's all any parent can do." I drove home through gray February slush, thinking about teaching and learning and whether Kyle was even capable of understanding the lesson I was trying to leave him. Maggie would have known. She'd always understood Kyle in ways I never quite could, seen through his defenses to the insecure boy underneath all that ambition and pride. March brought early spring to Cedar Falls, crocuses pushing up through the last patches of snow, the air losing its sharp edge. I felt better physically, stronger, but something had shifted inside me. An acceptance, maybe. An understanding that my relationship with Kyle was what it was, and no amount of wishing would change it. He called on my birthday, March 23rd, right on schedule. We talked for exactly 12 minutes, him telling me about Emma's soccer team and a promotion he was up for at work, me listening and making appropriate sounds but feeling nothing. When he asked how I was doing, I said fine, and he accepted it without question, without curiosity, without real interest. After we hung up, I sat in Maggie's garden, where her roses were just beginning to bud, and let myself grieve. Not for what was lost, we'd already lost that, but for what had never really existed. The son I'd imagined, the man I'd hoped Kyle would become, had always been a fantasy. The real Kyle, the one who measured relationships in terms of usefulness and opportunity, was someone I didn't particularly like. And that was the hardest truth of all. April arrived with unexpected warmth, coaxing everything back to life after the long winter. I spent my mornings working in Maggie's garden, planting the tomatoes and peppers she'd always loved, talking to her the way I had when she was alive. Telling her about Kyle, about the will, about the choices I'd made. Sometimes I swore I could feel her approval, a warmth in the sunshine or a gentle breeze that felt like her hand on my shoulder. Tom found me there one Saturday afternoon, dirt under my fingernails, sweat on my forehead despite the cool breeze. "Got a letter from my daughter today," he said, settling onto the garden bench Maggie and I had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. First real communication in months. Wants to know if I'm planning to help with her kids' college funds. I sat back on my heels, wiping my hands on my jeans. "What did you tell her?" "Haven't answered yet. Trying to figure out if I'm angrier or sadder." He picked at a loose splinter on the bench. "How do your own children become strangers?" I changed her diapers, taught her to ride a bike, sat through every school play and soccer game. Now I'm just a bank account to her. I ask myself the same thing about Kyle. I pulled off my gardening gloves and joined him on the bench. "Maggie used to say that you raise your kids to leave you, to build their own lives. But I don't think she meant leave you behind completely." "No," Tom agreed. "There's a difference between independence and abandonment. Our kids don't seem to know where that line is." We sat in companionable silence, two old men puzzling over the mystery of how love could flow so strongly in one direction and barely trickle back. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, and somewhere down the street, children were playing, their laughter carrying on the wind. Other people's grandchildren, living lives we weren't part of. "You ever regret it?" Tom asked finally. "The new will, I mean. Giving it all away instead of to Kyle?" I thought about it, really thought about it, searching for regret and finding none. No. Because keeping it the way it was would be saying that blood matters more than values. That family means you get everything regardless of how you treat people. Maggie and I didn't believe that. We believed you had to earn love by giving it, that relationships required effort and presence and sacrifice. Kyle's going to be furious. Probably. But maybe he'll also learn something. If not immediately, then eventually. When he's my age and looking back, maybe he'll understand what he threw away for the Bradfords and their ski trips and their networking opportunities. Tom stood, stretching his back with a wince. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Maggie would be proud of you, Walt. I'm sure of it." After he left, I stayed in the garden until the light began to fade, watching the sky turn from blue to pink to purple. The house would be empty when I went inside, the same as it had been for 3 years now, but somehow tonight that felt okay. I'd made my peace with the silence, with the solitude, with the reality that the family I'd imagined was never going to exist. May brought Emma's 9th birthday, and Kyle actually called to invite me to the party. "It's going to be at this event space in Riverside Heights," he said, enthusiasm genuine for the first time in months. "Vanessa's going all out. Pony rides, a petting zoo, professional entertainment. Emma's so excited." "Sounds expensive," I said neutrally. "Well, yeah, but she's only 9 once, right? The Bradfords are helping with costs. Richard knows the guy who owns the venue." Of course he did. What time? Party starts at 2 on Saturday. It's black tie optional, so you might want to, dress nice. Black tie optional for a 9-year-old's birthday party. I thought about Emma's last birthday, when she'd come to my house and we'd made cupcakes together, decorating them with way too much frosting and sprinkles, laughing when they turned out lopsided and messy. She'd said it was the best birthday ever. I'll be there, I told Kyle, though something in my chest tightened at the thought of watching my granddaughter's childhood being transformed into another Bradford social event. The party was exactly what I'd feared. The venue was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, with professional decorations that probably cost more than most families spent on their mortgage. Children ran around in designer clothes while parents networked over champagne and catered appetizers. Emma wore a dress that looked uncomfortable, her hair styled in elaborate curls that must have taken hours. She spotted me the moment I arrived, her face lighting up in a way that made the whole uncomfortable afternoon worthwhile. "Grandpa." She ran to me, not caring that her fancy shoes weren't made for running, throwing her arms around my waist. "You came." "Of course I came. Wouldn't miss your birthday for anything." I handed her the present I'd brought, wrapped in simple paper with a bow I'd tied myself. Nothing fancy, just a book of fairy tales that had belonged to her grandmother, with Maggie's notes in the margins. Emma tore into it immediately, ignoring Vanessa's sharp intake of breath at the impropriety of opening gifts before the designated time. When she saw what it was, her eyes went wide. "Is this Grandma Maggie's?" "It was her favorite book when she was your age." "See," she wrote little notes about which stories she liked best. "I thought you might want to have it." "Walt, that's so thoughtful," Vanessa said, her voice tight in that way that meant she thought it was anything but. "Though we've been trying to limit screen time, and that includes reading. Emma needs to focus on her extracurriculars." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "You're limiting reading?" "Studies show that too much solitary activity can impact social development. Emma needs to be well-rounded." Vanessa plucked the book from Emma's hands, ignoring her daughter's protest. "We'll keep this somewhere safe, sweetheart. Maybe when you're older." Kyle appeared then, looking uncomfortable but not disagreeing with his wife. "Hey, Dad. Glad you could make it. Pretty great setup, right?" "It's something," I said, watching Emma's disappointed face as Vanessa carried the book away like contraband. "Must have cost a fortune. Richard covered most of it. Said Emma deserved the best." Kyle followed my gaze to where his daughter stood alone amid all the chaos and expense, looking lost. "She seems happy, right? Did she? Or was that just what Kyle wanted to see?" Before I could answer, Richard Bradford himself appeared, booming voice and commanding presence, his hand extended for a shake that felt more like a dominance display than a greeting. "Walt, good to finally meet Emma's other grandfather. Kyle's told us all about you." I doubted that very much, but I shook his hand. "Richard. Thanks for helping with the party. Anything for my granddaughter. Family first, that's what I always say." He clapped Kyle on the shoulder with the proprietary air of someone who'd bought and paid for the privilege. "This boy's going places. We're grooming him to take over the commercial division. Another few years and he'll be running the whole operation." Kyle beamed under the praise like a dog being offered a treat, and something in me broke. This was what he'd chosen. This loud, arrogant man who measured worth in dollar signs and saw people as investments. This was more important to Kyle than his own father, than the values Maggie and I had tried to instill, than 40 years of family tradition. "Excuse me," I said, moving away before I said something I'd regret. I found Emma by the pony rides, watching other children take their turns but not joining in. "Not interested in the ponies?" "They're okay." She leaned against me, small and warm and real in a way nothing else at this party was. "Grandpa, why didn't you come for Thanksgiving?" The question caught me off guard. "You noticed I wasn't there?" "Of course I noticed. Dad said you were busy, but I know that's not true. You're never too busy for me." Her 9-year-old wisdom cut straight through to the heart of things. "Did you and Dad have a fight?" How did I answer that honestly without turning her against her father? Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people's feelings. Your dad chose to spend Thanksgiving somewhere else, and that made me sad. But that's between him and me, okay? It has nothing to do with you. I wanted to see you, she said quietly. The Bradford house was fancy, but it wasn't fun. Nobody played games or told stories. We just sat at this huge table and ate food I didn't even like, and all the adults talked about boring stuff. I pulled her close, my heart aching for this little girl caught between two worlds. I wanted to see you too, sweetheart. More than anything. Can I come visit you soon? Just us? We could make those cupcakes again, the messy ones. I would love that. Anytime you want. But I knew it wouldn't happen. Kyle and Vanessa were already pulling Emma further into their orbit, into the Bradford universe of expensive parties and proper behavior and limiting reading time. My modest house on Maple Ridge Road had no place in the life they were building for her. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September, almost a year after that Thanksgiving that had changed everything. I was replacing a rotted board on my back porch, the kind of maintenance work that kept a house standing and gave an old man purpose, when my phone rang from inside. I almost didn't answer, figuring it was another robocall about extended car warranties, but something made me set down my hammer and go inside. Mr. Thompson? This is Patricia Reynolds. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Her voice carried that careful professional tone that preceded life-changing information. I wanted to let you know before you heard it elsewhere. There's been an accident. My legs went weak and I sank into the kitchen chair. Kyle? No. Kyle and his family are fine. But there was an incident at a construction site Richard Bradford was developing. I'm so sorry to tell you this, Walt, but Richard didn't survive. The funeral is scheduled for Friday. I sat there processing the information, feeling an unexpected rush of complicated emotions. I'd never liked Richard Bradford, resented what he represented and how he'd pulled Kyle away from his own family. But death was still death, and Vanessa had just lost her father. How is Kyle handling it? From what I understand, he's devastated. Richard was his mentor, his business partner. The entire Bradford family is in shock. She paused. I'm calling because I thought you should know, and because this might be an opportunity to reach out to your son. Grief has a way of clarifying what matters. After we hung up, I stood at my kitchen window for a long time, watching clouds move across the September sky. Richard Bradford, larger than life and twice as loud, was gone. The man who'd hosted the Thanksgiving that broke my family, who'd offered Kyle everything I couldn't, had simply stopped existing between one moment and the next. It seemed impossible and inevitable all at once. I sent Kyle a text. Heard about Richard. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm here if you need anything. 3 hours passed before he responded. Thanks. Funeral Friday at 10, Riverside Memorial Chapel. An invitation or just information? I couldn't tell, but I decided to go anyway. The chapel was packed with people whose lives Richard had touched, mostly business associates and social acquaintances, the same crowd that had been at Emma's birthday party. Kyle sat in the front row between Vanessa and Caroline Bradford, his shoulders tight with tension, his face pale and drawn. I slipped into a back pew, not wanting to intrude but needing Kyle to know I'd shown up. Throughout the service, I watched my son struggle with genuine grief, saw how thoroughly Richard had filled the space in his life where a father should have been. When it ended and people filed out, Kyle's eyes found mine across the crowded chapel. For just a moment, something shifted in his expression, something that might have been gratitude or regret or simply recognition that I was there. He made his way over as the crowd thinned, Vanessa trailing behind him looking exhausted and red-eyed. Dad. You came. Of course I came. I know what Richard meant to you. It wasn't easy to say, acknowledging the man who'd replaced me in my son's life, but it was true when Kyle needed to hear it. He was going to make me partner, Kyle said, his voice breaking slightly. Next month. He had the whole announcement planned. And now he's just gone and I don't know what happens to any of it. There it was, even in grief, the focus on business and advancement and what he'd lost professionally. But I bit back the criticism I wanted to voice because this wasn't the time. I'm sure Richard made provisions. He was a careful man. Vanessa pulled at Kyle's arm. We need to get to the reception. Mom's falling apart and needs us. She barely looked at me, her dismissal clear even through her grief. Right. Thanks for coming, Dad. Kyle let himself be pulled away, and I watched them go, feeling the familiar ache of being peripheral to my own son's life. 2 months later, Patricia called again. Walt, I need you to come to my office. There's been a development you need to know about. When I arrived, she had that look again, the one that meant complicated news was coming. Richard Bradford's will was read yesterday. Kyle was expecting to inherit a significant stake in the business and a substantial financial settlement. Was? Richard left his business to his nephew, someone who's been working with him for years. Kyle received a modest bequest, $50,000, along with a letter. She handed me a copy, and I read Richard's words with growing understanding. The letter explained that Richard had watched Kyle carefully, seen how easily he'd abandoned his own father for opportunities and status, how he'd prioritized appearances over genuine relationships. Richard wrote that he couldn't trust his life's work to someone who measured people's worth by their usefulness, who would throw away 40 years of family tradition for a better networking opportunity. He hoped Kyle would learn from this, would understand that character mattered more than ambition. He's devastated, Patricia said quietly. According to his attorney, Kyle's been trying to contest the will, claiming he was promised more, that Richard led him to believe he'd inherit everything. I should have felt vindicated, watching Kyle experience exactly what he'd assumed I deserved, getting passed over despite years of loyalty and service. But I just felt sad. Sad that it took losing everything for Kyle to maybe, possibly, understand what he'd thrown away. 3 days later, Kyle showed up at my door. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks, his expensive suit rumpled and his eyes hollow. Can I come in? I stepped aside, letting him into the house he'd grown up in but rarely visited anymore. We sat at the kitchen table where Maggie and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped him with homework and listened to his dreams and tried to teach him how to be a good man. Richard's letter, Kyle said finally, his voice hoarse. He said I reminded him of his younger self, before he learned that money couldn't buy loyalty or love. He said he was doing me a favor, giving me a chance to figure that out before I ended up alone and wealthy with nobody who genuinely cared about me. I waited, letting him work through whatever he'd come to say. I read it 3 times before I understood he was talking about you. About how I treated you. About Thanksgiving. He looked up, and I saw my little boy in his eyes, the one who used to be afraid of thunderstorms and proud of making good grades. I threw away my father for a man who saw me as a cautionary tale. Kyle, Richard wasn't wrong. You did choose status over relationship. But he also wasn't entirely right, because you can still change. The question is whether you want to. I don't know how to fix this. You start by showing up, I said simply. Not when it's convenient, not when there's something in it for you, but because family matters. Because some things are more important than business opportunities or impressing the right people. We talked until dark, really talked for the first time in years. About Maggie, about the Thanksgiving he'd missed, about how he'd gotten so lost in pursuing success that he'd forgotten what actually mattered. About Emma and what values they were teaching her. About Richard's letter and my will and whether there was a path forward for us. I didn't tell him I'd changed my estate plans. That conversation could wait, if it needed to happen at all. What mattered was that my son was finally here, finally present, finally willing to examine the choices he'd made. Whether that translated into lasting change remained to be seen, but it was a beginning. As he left, Kyle paused at the door. Would you come to dinner next week? Just you and us, no Bradfords, no networking, just family. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. After he drove away, I walked through my quiet house, touching the photographs on the walls, the furniture Maggie and I had collected over decades, the physical evidence of a life built on love rather than ambition. Tom was right, Maggie would be proud. Not because I'd punished Kyle, but because I'd held firm to the values we'd built our marriage on. Because I'd shown that family meant something more than biology or obligation. That showing up mattered. That love required action, not just words. Whether Kyle truly understood that now, or whether this was just temporary clarity born from loss and shock, only time would tell. But I'd given him the same thing Richard Bradford had given him in that final letter, the truth about what mattered and a chance to choose differently. The rest was up to him. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.